passionne. Ça sent réel.
Did two men with a trunk get off here by any chance?
Oui?
Which way did they go?
That way, monsieur.
Oh, where are we anyway?
Guise. France. Let me help you, monsieur. There is a taxi at front, and a hotel nearby in Rennes-le-Château.
Appreciate it.
Alright, so we're on the next day now. We're on day 2. And for the most part, you will be playing Grace, which means Sydney is about to come into play. And as she looks around, she can see Gabe sleeping, and she doesn't want to wake him up because Grace is nice like that. When I first looked in the closet and saw that thing, I honestly thought it was like sheets of paper and I thought I would need it, but Grace is already carrying her notebook. Now the things on the table are for fingerprint kits, so there's one more, so Gabe will use it. So here's the part where I was talking about every time I had to use Sydney, I would have to basically save beforehand and then launch the 640 by 480. And in order to make this as seamless as possible, where I could, where if it was just a needless save, like if I'm going for 1920 to 640, and if you have no idea what I'm talking about, you can watch my previous comments, or I'll just explain it again. I'll just explain it again. I played Gabriel Knight 3 in 1920 by 1080p resolution. However, when you use Sydney, the computer, the way it works, this whole screen, does not work because it draws the computer in a very odd way. So like part of the screen's over here, part of the screen's over here, and it actually won't work. So you have to actually reduce it to 640 by 480. So I had two executables essentially to launch the game. So I normally played it 1920, then whenever I had to use Sydney, I had to switch over. And what I was saying is, to make it as effortless as possible, is right before I would use Sydney, I would save, and then I'd launch the 640 by 480, restore, and start using Sydney. But so it wasn't as disruptive because of how often I had to use Sydney, which is the computer. I cut out those areas where you see me save and restore, because otherwise it'd be quite frequent every time I was switching back and forth between Sydney and then just playing Gabriel Knight. So in Sydney, it is essentially a database. One of the things that Gabe talks about previously is, hey, there's all this talk of blood and vampires and stuff like that. So you basically go down a rabbit, I went down a rabbit hole. I don't even know if I had to click all these links. But I was trying to note which ones I hadn't clicked on so I could go back and click it and then read all of this stuff. Because as I said in the other talk through, there is so much information in this game. And what I said in the other one is if you play Gabriel Knight 3 pretty much back to back, within just maybe a day or two, it's really easy to retain all this information you're learning. For me, I'm a much older man these days, and my memory's not as good as it used to be. I played Gabriel Knight 3 over the span of 2 weeks, so a lot of what I was learning through the game to try to remember, I would forget. So there would be portions. This part of Sydney's easy. This is just literally, it's Wikipedia. There's just links everywhere with a ton of information. But eventually you'll do more complicated things with Sydney. So right now I'm just doing some reading, seeing if there's anything here that is a clue as to what is going on in the game. And normally when I am not talking during the commentary, I'll speed up the game again. But what I've done this time is I've put the music of Gabriel Knight 3. I picked a few tracks that I really liked, and they play in the background, which you can hear as I'm talking. So when I am not talking about something obviously I'm not going to talk about the whole time while I'm reading all this stuff, because I actually spent a long, I might actually talk the whole time, but I spent a lot of time going down several rabbit holes and clicking different links and reading all this information that was in here, not only to see if it gave me points or gave me a clue or stuff like that, but because I did so much work, I tried to get the most out of the game. But anyway, anticipating that I'm not going to talk the whole way through this, or there's going to be segments where I'm not talking, rather than speeding up the game, I'm just going to let the soundtrack play in the background. And if you were not aware, on my channel, I also uploaded not just the Gabriel Knight 3 soundtrack, but a bunch of different Sierra soundtracks. So if you're ever interested in listening to Sierra music in general, the soundtracks are on my channel. I even made a few for Halloween. A lot of them include Gabriel Knight songs because you got that. Some of them have that weird, scary, creepy vibe that would make a great Halloween track. Real quick, as I've said, there is a ton of information to find in Sydney, and I just want to commend Jane Jensen and whoever, if anyone else, helped her do this amazing amount of research and then to type it all into the game. Gabriel Knight 3, in the previous talk through that I was talking about in Gabriel Knight 3, I talked about all the information you could find in the church just by clicking on all the portraits and stuff like that. Again, there is so much information in Gabriel Knight 3. And it's not so much that it's overbearing. Like I said, if you're playing Gabriel Knight over a long period of time, it's easy to forget because there's so much information. But it feels more realistic that you can find information in this game that isn't always going to be applicable to giving you a clue or something like that. It's just general information of hey, this is what they know about XYZ, or this is what they know about this, and here's some notes about reincarnation and stuff like that. So the amount of work that went into producing all of this information is freaking incredible. And it feels very realistic that there, like I said, there is more information here than you actually need. So you can spend a long time reading a lot of stuff on Sydney if you wanted to. It does kind of feel like the internet in that regard, though, right? I did a search for vampires, and now I'm reading about helper spirits. Like, how does that happen? You ever do that where you're on the internet and you're searching for something, and it's like, I don't know, 9 p.m., and you finally take a pause because you're thirsty or you need to use the restroom, and you look at the clock, and it's now 4 a.m., and you first started researching apples, but now suddenly you're on a page about serial killers, and you're like, how did I get from apples to serial killers? Like, how did this happen? You can do the same thing on Sydney. You look up vampires, and then suddenly you're reading about shamans. So it's not to the extreme of apples and serial killers, but there you go. I will say that is the one downside to using Sydney, that it doesn't operate like a browser. It doesn't have like a right click open in a new tab. So there would be times where I'd be reading a very long paragraph that has like 4 or 5 different links, and I'd click that next link, go down to the next one, go down to the next one, go down, and I'd have to hit back, like I'm doing now, a number of times to get to the original article I was reading. So I do wish that there was a way in Sydney that you can kind of like open quote unquote multiple tabs, so that it becomes much easier to understand if you've already read this or not, because there is a lot of information in here and there are a lot of links. So like being able to open multiple tabs, if you will, would have been helpful in Sydney if you were trying to get the most out of this game, or sorry, the most out of the information that is being provided. Or come to think of it, if they couldn't do multiple tabs, if there was a link where you've already read the information, like change the color of the link from yellow to blue or something. But even then, some of those that you've already read had multiple links inside of it, so not even that's a good option. The multiple tabs would have worked best. Just saying. Okay, maybe I lied. Maybe I will speed up some of this, because this is a long time of a lot of reading, which you can check out on the normal playthrough. So let me go ahead and zip through some of this. Alright, naturally, as soon as I say let's zip through it, I was pretty much almost done already anyway. Alright, so as Grace, we're going to walk around, window open. And other than something that happens in a cutscene, I am not sure why that window opens, other than to perhaps say that it is something that can be opened. And if you look, there's a book. Well, that's strange. Let's take a look. It's like one of the books from the bookstore that's closed. So who is leaving the mysterious gift? It has a poem in it, and she's going to leave it for Gabriel. But if you click it, you can read it, and it will provide a clue, because Grace is one that pretty much does all the research. Gabe just puts in the information. Is it me, or does that look like a sandwich? You can see sparks will fly between these two, but not in a positive way, as they both have a common interest. It's not the treasure, it's Gabe. And I talked about it in the other one. I think it's interesting because I do believe that Jean may enjoy the company of men in terms of how polite he is when he speaks to Gabriel, but he's very short and kind of snappy with how he speaks to Grace. So now with Grace, kind of doing the same thing that I traditionally do when something new has happened and triggered. Gonna walk around, see if anything has changed or if there's anything to interact with or any people to interact with, since we now got the book. Oh, and look, he's up here. I do like that they give the characters certain quirks also, like the way he always stands. He's always resting his hand on his gut, and as a much older man, I completely understand. I try not to rest my hand on my gut. Not that I have one, right? Because I'm not old at all. Anyway, but they do have interesting quirks like that. Like you'll see the one individual who plays a very big part of the game. He will always walk around with his hand in his pocket. And you'll notice for some reason it's very difficult to get his fingerprints. As a matter of fact, it's impossible. So no surprise he's not inside here because we just saw him outside with the binoculars. But if you look, there is now an English version of the pamphlet. So again, just wandering around, seeing if there's anything of note to interact with or see or overhear, or people that have moved to a different location. Grace will be able to eventually take the motorcycle, but most of Grace's role is indeed research. But she will be the one to find some very vital stuff outside of Le Red Chateau. Can't take the motorcycle because Gabe has the keys. So it's a lot of walking around, just trying to figure out what we need to do with Grace. Let's go see if Mosley's around. Looks like the tour is about to leave, and Mosley shows up just in time. So now Grace, who is a part of this tour, after she'd spoken with the tour leader, she takes the group around the tour and shows them the tomb, which is over there right behind her. But if you notice, the guy who was talking about that usually has his hands in his pocket. He's got a stick in his hand. And she's showing off the postcards, which will come into play later. He's got a stick in his hand and looks like he's doing something every once in a while. Like when they cut to a scene behind him, like right there, definitely looks like he's doing something. So definitely something about this game, you always have to keep your eyes open for those small little details. And now they all kind of finish, and now the first thing you want to do is see what he's doing. And he wrote "some" on the ground. It's going to be important to note that. Doesn't sound like anything, but one of the things that Sydney can do is translate. And so we'll translate what some means. And that was the thing with the translations. I was literally at times just going down the line of the various translation, like Italian to English, French to English, and just stuff like that until it actually properly translated. So during this time, you just kind of talk to everyone, and eventually she'll say, all right, let's go to the next area. And from here, she talks about how it's a great vantage point and what used to be here. And so once again, this is where you can go when Grace, every time I see her, she makes me laugh, because she always has the cool, outlandish outfits. But you'll eventually get a pair of binoculars for Grace as well, and she'll be able to come here and check out the sights. Now what you want to do here is kind of listen to people and talk to who you can, and you're going to gather a little bit of information about each one. So even as you're listening to conversations, you'll see that others will move in and the conversation will continue and evolve. Wilkes is awesome. He cracks me up. He's he's a chauvinist pig, but he's so over the top. It's very hard to take him serious. So once again, you're gonna, while you have time, talk to everyone as you're overhearing more conversations and learning more. Conversation trees continue to open up to ask different people different things now that you're hearing more and more. And really, to get the most out of the game, you should always talk to everyone about every conversation tree branch that's available. I like his shoulder twitch that he does. That. One of the things I do wish that they would have done, especially during times like this where you're talking to everyone, is to be able to ask everyone about the others, like what do they think of them, and see if there's relationships between the others, like, oh, I don't trust this guy, or, I heard this guy said this. It would have been kind of cool to get conversation trees, and on some of them you can, just like that. But it would have been kind of cool to have all the guests pretty much be available to talk about. I have no idea what shirt Mosley is wearing. So during this part, pretty much Grace is doing a lot of information gathering, because like I said, she's primarily the main person who does the research, while Gabe does all the risky stuff and puts his life on the line, quite literally near the end. Sierra games are notorious for being able to die quite frequently. If you look at King's Quest, you can die from falling off stairs. If you look at Space Quest, you can die from picking up a piece of metal. Quest for Glory, you can just die on a random encounter while you're walking through the woods. Every Sierra game, pretty much, death was around every corner, and the saying of save early, save often was born. But here in Gabriel Knight, you actually cannot die that I'm aware of until right near the end. Alright, so we'll stop here and we'll go to the next segment.